this class is going to start off with looking at assignments 1, 2, and 3 from last week. You guys all probably noticed I put some stuff in assignment 3 that we didn't cover, and that was intentional. I wanted you guys to try to Google some stuff and find some stuff out, ask for help. Because a lot of times if you do end up working in a programming language, you're almost guaranteed to hit something that you don't know. But I kept it pretty simple. There was some very light things that I put in that you guys shouldn't know. One of those is loops. We hadn't talked about those yet. I wanted to see if you'd get those. And the other was if statements. We didn't talk about logic statements before, but again, felt pretty light. So this is what your code more or less should look like by the end of assignment 3. These two, by the end of assignment 3, this is what your assignments should look like. You should have at least two programs, 2 files under the solution. In your main, you should create a certain number of cars. I think I should lower that to 10. You should add them to some sort of inventory and make sure that you print out specific details. I did have extension sections in assignments 2 and 3 where there was stuff we covered, but I considered extra credit for you guys to actually do it. The extra credit items were find cars, print car details, and I think it was print inventory, but it might have been something else. Each of those, it's easier to have it once you've written it, but they're kind of a little bit higher complication of when you're writing it. So going through this, if you guys all have your code up, here I have initialized my inventory, and I'm doing this in a for loop. I didn't ask you guys to. I just did this because it was easier for me than defining 10 cars. And this has to do with the for loop. So you should define make, model, year, price, and mileage for a set number of cars that you put in your inventory. You should be using a constructor method to do this. Your constructor method would be in your car class, and you'd have something like this one. I made mine a little advanced, but it's still just really basic car constructor. You should be printing out the original price. You should be printing out the depreciated price after the update. And if you did the extensions, you'll be showing your find cars method. In your car class, you should have your calculate depreciation. You should update the price variable stored in your car. And you should have accessors for make and model if you did the extension. This print car details was the extension on assignment 2. You should have that somewhere in your code, but it's just whether it's over here in program or if you moved it to your car method or car class and put it in a method. The last thing you should have is a property in your car. Properties are public variables that come with a getter and a setter. I mentioned that in last week's lecture, and it was in the notes, but it wasn't any kind of detailed focus because it's a pretty small ad. As it stands, does anybody have any questions? I'm sure there's more than a few things. So we're setting aside the first probably close to half of class for questions on assignments 1 through 3.
I have a couple. So I understood assignment 1 pretty much. That one was.
Can you hear Laura?
Yes.
Okay.
But I am a little bit confused on the classing. I think I need to figure out how to make it not private. I've noticed that in your code, now that I'm seeing your code against my code, I'm like, okay, so most of my issues stem from having mine. So I don't know how to explain it. But you're saying public, and I didn't do that.
So for assignment 2, when I mentioned in the notes, kind of in passing, in a class, all variables are defaulted to private. So if you want to access that variable directly from outside, like I did here, you have to declare it as public before you declare what it is.
Yeah, I feel really silly because I was racking my brain trying to figure out what I was doing wrong, and all it just was doing that.
You're good. I think there was a mistake in the homework that said that they needed to be private, but you couldn't have accessed it in assignment 2. They need to be private for assignment 3, but they should be public for assignment 2.
Jeez.
And this is what assignment 2 should look like when it's.
Yeah, mine is close to that, but it has a lot of errors because it can't pull the information because I didn't know I had to make it public.
Yeah, so if you make these public, then you can access them outside.
Okay.
Any other questions on assignment 2?
Yeah.
Oh.
Go ahead, Tabitha.
How do I view them side by side like you are?
Oh, if you go into Visual Studios, you probably see them like this, right?
Well, let me look at you and not my. Okay, yeah.
If you grab one of these, like a tab on Google, you can drag it
Oh.
down and it creates this little cross thing. And
Oh, okay.
depending on where you hover over is where it'll place that.
Oh, okay. I'll mute again.
No other questions, Tabby? That was it?
I have so many, but
Well,
I
that's
don't know.
what the
I
whole
can't think of
first
them.
half hour of this class is about.
I don't even know what questions to ask.
Well, you finished assignment 1 and you
Yes.
understood assignment 1. This is assignment 2. Do you have any questions on assignment 2?
Let me get them open side by side so I can compare, and then I'll ask questions.
Okay,
Just
go ahead, Dad.
organize.
What were your questions?
So I wrote all mine in one file in one in the main program. I didn't do a sub program for cars like you've done here.
Which this is a requirement in the homework
For 2.
Yeah.
for assignment 2. So you'll see right here
And
it
I
says
haven't made it
create
to
a car
2.
class on the first.
Okay. So
But really, most of what assignment 2 is versus assignment 1 is restructuring your code from assignment 1 to use class methods.
So okay, and how do you call from a class method into your main program?
So this is what assignment 1 would look like when you're done. And I actually made a mistake here. Price should be a decimal, not a double. So depreciation should also be a decimal. So you'll see that I'm not calling any class methods here, but when we go to here, you can see that I'm calling things from my car instances. So when I've created an instance of car, then I can use that car to call non-static methods of the car class. So these are public variables. These are public methods. So is this here and this here. In C#, you do name of the object dot its name of the method, and then its parameters.
Can you zoom in a little bit on that? I'm having a little trouble seeing the granular. There, hey, that's much better. Okay.
So it's name of the object dot name of the variable, or name of the object dot name of the method.
How do you have an X?
It makes it floating
Oh, yeah. Okay.
versus 2 decimal points, which is n. I learned that from talking to Cody yesterday.
The M doesn't mean that it's limited to 2. This just means that it's a decimal variable,
Yeah.
and this is a fixed type decimal, and this is a floating type decimal,
Okay.
which in programming we call them decimals and float.
So
Any other questions on assignment 2?
Haven't even started it yet. I'm still working on one. My computer won't load the program.
I
yeah.
imagine it'd be a little
well-
hard for your little computer.
Well, she's actually using my computer.
Oh, okay.
But she was having trouble setting up the first of the file.
Did it show
it
up
was-
as basically
No.
empty with just a little
Yeah,
thing?
it did. Yeah, it said
Okay.
it said hello world, but the static void main and
So when you're creating a new project and you select console app, you've got your console app, come in here, make sure you check this box. If you don't check that box, then when it creates it, you'll just get this.
Hey, that's what I got. Yeah.
okay.
So I have to go check that box and try again.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't. Well, all you got to do is add those 2 lines right there.
Yeah.
Yes, well, it's a couple lines you see.
Yeah.
You'd have to add all of this. But you actually don't have to add all of that, because technically you can take this code here, just rip out the first portion of this, that'll actually work, you know? And if you just paste this in here, it'll still work just fine. It just doesn't look as nice,
Yeah.
and it's definitely harder for a beginner programmer to read. This makes a lot of assumptions that this does not make.
Okay, so talk about when you did your recalculation on the price. It looks like you're rewriting the depreciated price over the original price. Is that
Over
true?
here?
No, on your homework number 2,
This is assignment 2.
right? So that
So
zoom in a little bit, like not line 20. Yeah, right there above
yeah,
your
right
cursor.
here. So yeah, I'm saying, hey, car 0, update your price using the depreciation that's calculated. And if we come over here, you can see I've calculated the depreciation and that gets returned. And then I am subtracting the deduction from the price, which that's what this minus equals is it's going to take the original value of price and just minus the value of deduction from it.
And that's why it's the equal deduction, is because you calculated that up above.
Yep. So it's minus equal,
right here.
and that'd be just subtracting a little bit.
So see here where he's calling this variable, and this is that calculation that you hadn't finished yet.
Yeah.
Mom was basically done with the first homework except for the formula.
That's fine. The formula was a little fucky anyways.
Well, we know that.
UTV. I gotta run.
And if I was to write this in my line of work, I would write this entire section as one line of. And that's because
you're
there's
just doing it for readability.
Yeah, I spread it out really far for you guys to read, because a ternary operator would take this whole thing as a single unit, single line of code. But you guys are nowhere near ternary operators yet.
No. Baby operators.
In assignment 2, you shouldn't be doing any operator. There's no if statements in this at all. Tabby, have you formulated any questions?
Start asking questions, Tab. I've asked some dumb ones, so go ahead. Charge ahead. Or
I just have to repeat things to be able to do it. I have to be walked through it and then repeat it. So I just need more practice is all.
She needs more homework. Did you hear that, Cody? I heard that.
I heard that.
Me too.
Well, it's going to take me repeating the same thing multiple times before it actually sticks in my brain is all.
And if you notice, we did a lot of repeating from last time. So we took our variables and we retyped them over here. We took everything we did in assignment 1 and retyped it. But we've reformatted it into essentially a more modern way of doing it.
I mean, as far as running though, is there a lot of difference between the way what you would have done as an experienced programmer and what you've done here on the screen?
From a computing cost perspective, it would be a little faster what I would have done, because the program will actually compile it as a static answer instead of figuring it out every time we run it. But in the case of computers, we're talking the difference of this code will run that at like 100 nanoseconds versus my ternary operator version would run it at like 60 nanoseconds.
Yeah, but if you take it times 10,000 cars, well,
Yeah.
All right, let's see.
It does make a difference, but not a huge one. And sometimes your compiler is smart enough that it'll just fix it anyways. But
so one of the things I guess that I need you to talk a little more about is when you update this price.
Over here?
Yeah, over there. When you run it through that formula the second time and update the price, that first number doesn't exist anymore, right?
What first number? Price?
The original price.
So when this goes off,
changed.
correct. So we're changing price by minusing deduction from it, which in assignment 2 is what it asks for.
Oh, sorry, I'm not muted.
It says update the price. And that's just, it's not overly important, but I was just trying to get you guys to use a variable that already existed and change what is stored there.
Okay. And what keeps it from going through that loop again? Just that there's no loop there?
Yeah, I currently don't have any loops in this at all. So it'll just run straight down this line of code, doing things in order. And the compiler will actually read this, and rather than reading this and then calling out to over here, it will actually just sub this deduction thing into this. So it all counts as just one line of code. Any other questions before we move on to looking at assignment 3? Laura, did you have any questions?
I think your mom's gonna have a lot, but she's not to the point where she can really ask them yet.
What was that, Tabby?
Can you explain the last paragraph on the line 27 through 30 on the programming.cs side?
27 through 30. All right. So this first line, all I'm doing is printing out a tab character and then car 0. And then on the next line down, it's calling car print details. So it goes over here and it goes print details, and it's going to write make, model, year, price, and mileage. And then this is a new line character. So this will actually add 2 new lines so that there's a space between this car and the next car. Is that all good, Tabby?
No, but that's okay. I'll walk through it later, I guess.
No, hold on, I want to ask a question about before you leave this. So zoom in on your left screen a little bit so I know what's in the right screen. That's plenty. Car details. So the /T, what is that?
That is a tab character. So when you're writing in Word and you hit the tab key,
yeah,
that's what that is.
Okay.
A tab character is different than spaces.
Okay. And that's when I did mine, if you looked at it, to do the inventory list, I just spaced over till it looked right instead of
and as far as the console write line is concerned, tabs and spaces are the same. But if we get to later in code and you're checking, hey, is this a space? And they actually inserted a tab character, it wouldn't know that it's a space.
Okay. Now, why does this call to that same location on the program and rerun that section, that print section? Why does it do that?
Because you'll notice I'm calling it from two different cars. So we've got car 0, our first car, which our car 0 is a Honda Civic, and our car 1 is a Toyota Corolla.
Okay.
So first we come in here and we say, hey, car 0, print car 0's details. So it's going to print all the details to do with the Honda Civic.
So where did you define print car details at?
Print car details is over here in car.
Okay, zoom in on that for just a second so I can see. I'll say, so that's that line above the public void print car details, line 29. That's the line it's actually calling to.
Correct.
Okay.
This is the declaration of that, and then this is the definition of what it does.
That now that makes sense to me.
So I didn't do that paragraph, the bottom one right there with the T
This
thingy.
one
Yeah.
was the extra credit.
Yeah, I didn't do it. Why? I'm trying to put it in now. Why is my print car details squiggly?
Have you already defined it over here?
I didn't. Wait, yeah? Oh, wait, I think I typed it wrong. No.
It needs to be spelled and cased exactly the same.
And it needs to say public, otherwise it won't.
And it does need to say public.
Access.
Okay, it says public. Is there a way to share my screen really fast without?
Yeah. Let me just
awkward.
stop my stream. You want to share yours?
Why is it red squigglies over here when this?
You're missing an end line on line 23.
Oh yeah. You need a semicolon right there.
Oh.
And then in the print card details, it's wanting.
Why did it go away?
And then you're missing an S on details in there as well.
And they also want a.
Yeah, you have told it you want it to have a float, update price. Do you actually want it to have that float?
I don't know, do I?
Go back to your car.
The way I helped her do this, because I helped her with this.
I see.
I helped her set it up a little differently.
That's fine. So you need to pass in your updated price in there, Tabby, in the parentheses.
So I just put what's here over there?
No, you just got to type in car.price minus depreciation.
Car. Why isn't it typing? Where am I typing?
Oh, wait. You've already done that.
Yeah, that's.
You just need to do car.price. But it's just going to print the same thing twice. Honestly, what I'd do is line 44, just delete it.
On which? On this
car.
one?
Line 44. Yep. Just shift delete that line.
The one that's red squiggled?
Uh-huh.
Oh.
Just hit
just click
shift and delete.
Just shift delete, Tabby.
I did.
Right now.
There you go.
Oh, the whole line's gone. Was that what's supposed to happen?
Yes.
Okay.
And then on line 37, remove the word float and car.
Do I leave the parentheses though?
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay, now it's upset over here.
Because you're passing in an updated price method. Is your update price method returning a variable? Yeah, it's returning a float. So on line 33, Just hit Control Z a couple times, Tabby.
On what?
Just where you're at. Hit Control Z a couple times. One more time. A couple more times, I lied. There you go. Now, on line 22 in your program, you're going to go in the parentheses there and do car.updated price, capital U. And I think you've done a capital C car.
Yeah, I'm car.updated price. Oh, wrong.
And then open parenthesis, depreciation.
No, she's still sitting in the driveway.
Open parentheses.
I
What was I
mean,
doing?
depreciation. And there's some additional things wrong with this program logic-wise that I'm looking over, but that's what you need to do.
Add a close parentheses.
Update. Yeah, you need to
Oh,
remove
I
the
did
D
it
in there.
plural. I mean, past tense. My bad.
And then you need to add a closed parenthesis at the end of the line. Yeah, right there. And then you just
And-
have to do the same thing, but with car 2 on line 24
Okay.
in there.
Okay,
Um,
I'll stop sharing now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Also, Tabby, if you
How do I-
look at line 19 and line, I think, 12, you already print out the car details.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
You're
I noticed that
already
mine
doing that.
were.
yeah.
I noticed that mine were in different spots. I just.
It being in different spots, I don't think is
No.
an issue.
The organization of mine is not overly important.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about
I
the
just did
organization.
mine at the bottom because that's where I preferred it.
Yeah,
I'll
so
probably just do what you did, just so that I don't get confused later on.
Well, what you've done is the same thing.
I didn't
Okay.
take my phone, so I couldn't take.
it's just the organization of his code is a little different.
Yep.
Okay.
So if you want, you can move what you have on line 21, you can move that above line 12, and then you can move line 20.
How do I do the move up thing again?
Hold
Do a
Alt.
shift?
No, you highlight the whole thing, and then hold Alt, and then use the arrow key.
And I'm putting it where?
Put it at like line 12. There you go.
Yeah.
And then you can move line, I think, 23, and move that to line 18. And then you can
There
then you should be able to get rid of those things.
These two?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That
Well,
one.
not the squiggly at the end, but.
Yeah.
Ah!
If you want, you can hit Shift Delete again. There you go. And so
Am I pretty
Yep, there you go.
That is
Okay.
assignment 2 complete, Tabby.
Yay! Alright, so it was completed, I just had it looking different.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just had it organized differently.
Okay. Well, I'm now this. Yeah, okay. Alright, I'm gonna stop streaming now.
Okay.
That way you guys don't see my awkwardness.
We're gonna touch briefly on assignment 3 because we've covered most of it now. Assignment 3.
One sec, I have one more question.
Okay.
What does a green squiggly mean?
That is typically it means it wasn't used.
Wasn't used?
So if you hover over it, just like with the red squiggles, it'll tell you what it's recommending for that. But it's
Okay.
not an error, it's just saying, hey, this is a recommendation.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So for this, I just created 10 cars. That's all this part is. I did them randomly. I did not ask you guys to do that. And then I'm printing out the cars as they were with the original prices. Then I'm deducting prices using a for loop. and then I'm printing out all the cars using a helper method.
Okay, now
Then-
explain what those terms, all those terms mean.
For loop, it loops for a set amount of loops. It indicates it with a number called an index. And in this case, I'm saying while starting at 0, while the index is less than the number of cars, increment I at the end of each time you go through. So add 1 to I. So it's going to go
Okay.
through each one of the 10 cars and update the price. A helper method is a little method that you build that is not attached to a class typically, that helps to separate out some of the functionality so that you stick with encapsulation. And encapsulation we covered in lecture 1. That's just making sure that this doesn't handle anything, this method doesn't handle anything it shouldn't need. And then these at the bottom, I wrote the find cars method, which these 3 are just the extra credit. You didn't have to print off 3. I was just showing that it worked in all 3 cases. It separates out those 3 vehicles and it finds them by make, model, and then by the make and the. And that method is here.
That was a kid walking up a motorcycle.
So in a method, you can define optional parameters, but they have to be declared after your required parameters. So you have a required parameter, comma, and then your optional parameters are set up like normal parameters, but you give them a default value. You say, hey, if they don't insert this, make it null or make it 4 or something like that. Other than that, I used if statements. We said if make is my default value, then loop through checking on the model. If model is the default value, loop through checking on the make. If neither one is the default value, then loop through and check on both the make and the model. In the car method, the only thing we've added is we added a constructor method. This handles the making of our car. We added a getter and a setter, or a getter for both make and model. That was part of the extra credit. You needed to do that as part of find cars. And we added this property, which is a variable that comes with its own getter and setter already made. Questions on assignment 3 as you read it? I know nobody's turned in assignment 3, but
She's asking about the semicolon at the end behind get and set.
so because this is
the end of the line.
yeah, so because this is not a variable, because these are variables, they declare what it is and then they do an end line because that's it. But if you notice behind any of our methods, we don't have a semicolon. But behind anything defined inside of our methods, we still have that semicolon. So this is kind of like a mix between a method and a variable. So it works kind of like a variable, but it's actually just 2 different methods hooked to a variable. So this is the declaration of that variable, and this is the 2 methods that it has defined as get and set. So they're 2 different lines. So you can technically rewrite this like
Yeah, I was
this.
gonna say that could be 2 lines.
Oh, okay. Now that actually makes it clear to show it that those can be combined.
Yeah, and when you're writing this, it'll actually default for you. You can say public float and see it's already suggesting something.
Yeah.
And that's the default way to
Private,
write
yeah.
a property. Yeah, ignore the private. I don't know why it wanted me to do private. But this is the way properties are written. They write them in line like this, so you can tell, oh, yeah, that's a property. Because if I wrote it with this all spaced out, you might think that maybe mileage is a method returning float. And we don't want them to be confused that way.
It also just looks a little cleaner when it's like that on one line.
Yeah.
It does
Yeah,
look
that makes
nice.
sense, Dylan.
Yeah. I was just curious because I knew that was end line, so I
Yep. There's just 2 lines inside this, so good catch. Any other questions on assignment 3 before we move on to the lecture note?
might have some when I'm doing it, but right now I'm okay.
Tabby, do you have any questions?
I'll ask questions later. I'm
Can you
just.
show me one more time how you called the program 2 different things? Oh, I explained myself wrong. I'm meaning the 2 screens where you can see the code side by side.
Oh. So normally they're set up like this. Just drag the tab down, it creates this little cross, and the section you put it on the cross is where it will show up.
Okay.
So this week we're going to be going over the last 2 pillars of our object-oriented programming, as well as some last-minute basics. So some of these things we've already used for the basics, but the last 2 of our pillars are inheritance and polymorphism. Inheritance is those families we were talking about last. You're going to have a parent and a child class. The child class is going to inherit methods and values from the parent object. So in my example I wrote for today, we're going to have an animal object or an animal class, that'll be our parent, and then we're going to have 2 children, dog and cat. Those are both types of animals. So it's really important for these inheritance to think of them as family units because they should be related objects. You don't want to have a dog that's classified or inheriting from the people class. You want it to be closely tied. That close tie is cohesion. And it's important to keep high levels of cohesion in our code so that it all makes sense for next time you open this. We've all heard the joke as programmers, when you wrote this, only you and God knew what it meant. Now only God knows. So that's why it's really important to keep good cohesion so as you read it, it just makes sense. And polymorphism is the last of our object-oriented pillars. And that's because in order to properly use polymorphism, you have to have all 3 previous pillars set up. Polymorphism is the ability for our code to be used in multiple different ways. So if we've got our animal with its inherited dog and cat class, and our animal class has a method called make noise, then we can use that make noise method on both a dog and a cat so that it's not just being used one way. We want our code to be as multifunctional as possible while still sticking to the other 3 pillars. Any questions on our pillars for this week? Okay. One of the things that we have already used and we are going to continue using is storage containers. For this class, our CS 101, we used lists, but we're also going to be using arrays. So a list is defined by calling list and giving it a type. That's what I had you guys use in this homework assignment. This allows you to not have to define a size because lists are arrays, but they allow you to have more and more as you need it. It's an expandable array. An array is defined like this. You've got string, square bracket. This is an array of string type. And then when we set it equal, we're going to list them out like this. You can make an array that doesn't have anything in it when you start, but it has to be of a set size when you make it. So this thing can only store 5 items. You can't store more than 5 items. Does our storage containers make sense?
So an array can only hold 5, or are you saying that as an example?
That was my example. You have to declare a number of how much storage space you have allocated for an array.
Okay.
You can have pretty much however many you want. It's
Yeah,
just,
if you wanted it to be in the thousands, you can.
You could do, okay.
you just won't be able to
But
change
you have
the
to
size.
declare it when you make it. You can't change the size, yeah. You can have it set to 5,000 instead of just 5. The reason it's important to use lists if you don't know the size of your array is because a list will only use the space that it needs. But you can always just add more. So you'll see I'm referencing this list item and I'm just saying, hey, add a new car. And it'll just make the space and add that car to the list. A list object, though, is a heavier object. So if you're trying to make a really light program, something that's going to run really fast, you're going to want to use arrays wherever you can.
It just streamlines it. I get it.
Correct.
Yeah, they take less space and like the storage and whatnot.
Significantly less storage space.
If you're
This is the
really
wrong-
doing that, go back to your program for just a second. If you're really doing that in your array, wouldn't you have to do an if statement to?
We lost you partway
How
through
would-
that. Wouldn't we have
how
to
would
use
you-
an if statement?
How would you select? So, if are you asking them to do input here, or are you just randomly generating an array?
I'm just randomly generating, but these arrays are actually strictly typed, meaning I have
Okay.
input these, they will not change from one run to the next. But you can see that I'm accessing the, and you can access lists and arrays the same way. I can access this array by going make. So we got our makes, and we're going to say makes I. And that's going to be access to the make at this index. I can also just say make 0. Make 0 is going to be the first item in our array.
Right.
So if we do make 4, don't delete that. That would be the last item in our array. And the same goes for model, but we can also access cars this way, which is our list object. So if we have cars and we want to get the 4th car, we can just do that. Or we can use I.
And that way you're just calling off this other list that's called cars.
Yeah, and this one's a list object. We can do the same thing with make. That'll call from the makes array instead of the cars list. And models, they all work the same because this portion here is telling it which object in the array or in the list we want to access. And you access it via the number in the list, which item in the list it is. Does that make sense? Because that's going to be an important part moving forward. Tabby, do you understand?
Nope.
Well, then ask questions.
Barely understanding enough to even comprehend a question to ask.
Exactly.
So
I wouldn't if the screens were more zoomed in.
our arrays and our lists, all intents and purposes, a list is an array.
You have to say that louder if you heard.
I got the list and the array thing.
So each item in the array or list has a storage location. That storage location is indicated by a number. And it starts on the first item, always starts at 0.
Yeah.
And adds 1 for each item down the list. That goes for both arrays and lists. In order to access that number, you just have to use these square brackets. So you say makes square and then number. And that'll give you the specific location.
So the squares mean where you're going to put your input from drawing.
The
from
squares is asking for a specific address in this array.
Oh, okay. Would
So-
you mind moving your screen in a little bit, Cody?
Zooming.
Making it a little bit bigger so we could see, yeah.
Sorry, I'm blind. Thank you. Yeah, okay.
Does the list and array thing make sense, Tabby?
Yeah.
Okay. Lists and arrays are going to be very important in the next two assignments. All right. Those are the only two storage containers we're going to worry about, lists and arrays. When we head into harder program, we'll add a few more, but those are the ones that majority of programmers will use. A lot of programmers never even get to more complicated data structures for storage. Okay, now there are three main kinds of loops. There's 4 loops that I'll show you guys, but know that there are 3 main kinds. The kinds are for, while, and do while. A for loop loops over a section of code for a set number of loops. So in my code, I'm saying for the number of cars. That's how many loops I want. And the way we define this is for, and then we have to define an index of our loop. This is the count of how many times our loop has gone through. So we're starting at 0. And you can start at any number you want. It doesn't matter, but for our example here, we want to start at 0 because that's the beginning of our array. And we're saying while the number of times it's looped through this is less than the number of cars, which is 10, then it's going to do this code. And when it's done doing this code, it's going to add 1 to this I.
Wouldn't that give you 11 cars?
No, because it's just less than. So when this is 9
Okay.
and it adds 1, it's going to go, oh, that's equal to cars now. So it's going to drop out.
Okay.
Otherwise, you'd be exactly right. So if I just inserted less than or equal to, that would be 11 cars.
Okay.
Do you guys understand this line here?
I do.
Sorta.
What
And
tells
again-
you to go back to the top? It's just the end of the program?
Yeah, the end of this loop, which is this closed curly bracket, tells it to go back to the top. But that's only because it is defined as a for loop. If we define this as if, it's not going to go to the top.
Okay, we missed some
We
of
missed
that.
some. Wait a second.
It goes back to the top of the program, or top of the scope of our for loop when you hit this closed curly bracket, because it's a for loop. If it's not a loop, like if it says if, which obviously isn't going to work, but when it hits this end one, it'll just continue on.
Okay.
But since it's a loop type, it will hit this and jump back to the top. Does everyone understand for loops?
Yeah.
Sure. Tabby,
Tabby.
this is where you see something.
Say something.
I need verbal confirmation that you understand for loop.
Yeah.
Okay. The reason I said I'm going to show you guys 4 types of loops, even though there's only really 3, is there's what's called a for each loop, which is a simpler version of a for loop. Rather than defining and caring about the number of times it loops, we just want to make sure that for each item in that array, we want to do something. So it's saying, hey, for each car in that cars list, just print the car details.
That's straightforward.
It functions the same under the hood as a for loop, but it hides some of the details, trying to make it more clear as to what's going on. Saying, hey, for each car in cars, car.print car details.
So why the bottom line or the bottom dash there before car the second or before
Okay,
cars?
so when you're defining a method parameter, it's one of the naming conventions that is used is called a, oh, help me out here, Dylan. What's the name they use? Member variable, right?
For what?
For the underscore before your variable name.
I don't ever really use underscores. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the naming convention here is for member variables where it's passed in. You can put an underscore before it to say, hey, in case this gets confusing, this underscore means that it's a passed in member variable.
Okay.
You don't have to have it there.
Okay. And
It
the
doesn't
car,
matter.
the car that is, so you got cars there, or the word car there twice.
Yeah, so I have car and cars. Because this one is multiple cars, and this one is an individual car.
And that's within the car, right?
Yes,
So
so this
car
is
from car
a
class.
car that is in cars.
In the cars.
Yeah.
Okay. Roll back up to that section of the real quick, just so I've got it in my head here.
Roll back up to where?
Right there.
Okay.
Cars equals. Okay. Got it.
All right. So that one is kind of a different kind of loop, but it actually functions the exact same. Under the hood, it's still going to have that int I equals 0 and so on. It just hides that for you, so you don't have to worry about it.
I'm just looking at Stack Overflow. There, some people typically just use it to represent a private variable.
Yeah. A private or a member variable, those are the same thing.
Yeah.
So the reason private is you can't access this outside of the scope of this method. It is a member of this method and nothing.
Okay.
Okay. So that is loops, or that is the for loop. While loop. I don't have any while loops in this code, I don't think. Nope. So we're going to add one. So you see in my animal shelter method, I've got a for loop. You can also do while loops for things, but you have to. Sure.
Thank you.
You have to define a condition for your while loop. So you say while, not what it wants. While is alive, and then it's going to do a while loop. You can make this any condition. So you can use a while loop like a for loop. but the while loop does not automatically increment anything at the end of its loop, the end of the scope. So as we're going through the while loop, it will do it forever in this case, because we never update I, right? So we would either need to add some way to update I, or as my first example with is alive, we can define a bool, which is a true-false value, set it to true, because our condition when we're first entering the while loop has to say true. It has to be a true statement, or else the while loop will just get skipped. So if this was false, nothing in here would ever get run, not even one.
Isn't it the other way around? Where as long as the statement isn't true, it runs?
Pretty sure it's while it is true. We can test. So we say, hey, while this is alive, do this stuff. But again, this will run forever because we never update is alive. So instead, we come in here and we can update is alive to false, or we can add a condition statement that says, hey, if this happens, oops, then set is alive to false.
Your if statement's a little broken.
What?
Your if statement's half of it's commented out.
Yeah, I know. I saw that. Guess I'd have to do something with this.
Trucks.
Yeah, 2 big trucks going out.
Okay. So this is a while loop, and it's important that your condition means that the while loop will run. Otherwise, it'll skip it. But the third type of loop is a do while loop. A do while loop goes the other direction. It's going to make sure that it does this stuff once, even if this is false. So even if it wouldn't run normally, it will do this stuff one time. Do while loops make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Can we get an example of where you would use a do while loop?
Oh, good question. I don't use them all that often.
People don't typically use do while loops. It's probably one of the
It's
least
a pretty
used ones.
edge case loop.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't seem to make sense for a lot of the programs, at least that I've seen. I mean, we've only seen 3. It wouldn't make sense for any of the code we're writing right now.
It wouldn't make sense for any of the code we're writing right now. Because most of the time, when you want to do a thing, you're going to make sure that the condition is correct before you try doing the thing for it. But there are some small edge cases. A lot of them have to do with database work. Like if you're updating the time or you're waiting for a certain period of time. Like if you're waiting for a value to update in your system, you can say do wait, and then after it's done waiting, you check that value.
Okay.
So that you're making sure it does at least one wait before it tries to continue with the code.
Okay.
But they are kind of less common than the other like loops. Most times you're either using a for loop, a for each loop, or a while loop.
Okay, that makes sense.
Logical statements. Logical statements for our course are going to be exclusively if. In the next class, we'll cover some other types like switch and other things, but we're going to check things in if statements. So we want to go here. Let me pull up the C# here. If car model is equal to the model that was passed in, then hey, we need to add that car. If car make equals the make that was passed in, then we need to add that car. There are several different logical operators that you can add in an if statement. So if we have an if statement, a little too close. Go.
Did we lose him?
Yep.
Are you back?
Yeah.
Yep, we're back.
Now we are.
Okay,
Sort of.
we're doing if statements. So an if statement has a condition in it, but you can also put logical things, logic work in a logical conditions in your if statement. So you can say, hey, if the car make and the car model are equal to what was asked for. This symbol, what?
Never mind, you're about to say it.
Yeah, so this symbol means and. If we do just a single and in programming, that is address. So we don't typically use that, but that's dependent on the language you're using. In the C
Why we
languages,
use 2 equal signs too. No, I'm just kidding.
for the same reason, because we're checking. If you're using just one of something, you're assigning. If you're using two of something, you're checking.
Okay, yeah. Makes sense.
So our logical symbols that we will care about is and, which is two and symbols, and or, which is two pipes.
Okay.
So you've got and or. You also have NAND and NOR and all the other logic functions that you can think of. But for our assignment, the only two we care about is and or. Any questions on if statements? Does it make sense to everyone?
I think it'll make more sense to me when I do some hands-on.
And a good portion of how you should be writing your code is it should read like a sentence. If car make equals member make and car model equals member model, then do this.
He answered what I was about to ask him, like, where's the then? Because most statements are if then. So
The
we don't
then
have-
in C# is assumed, but in like Java, you have to type that out.
In BASIC, you have to type it out too. If then,
Yeah.
else.
But a lot of higher level languages assume the then.
Do they have an if then else statement in this?
Yeah,
language?
so you can else any if. So you can see I do if, else if, and else.
Okay.
Else is going to do if neither one of these run, then it's going to do this no matter what.
Okay.
The then is kind of just assumed with your scope.
The then is the squiggly brackets, pretty
Yeah.
much.
There is additional thens in Java that you got to watch out for. In Java, I think it's JavaScript. If you do a dot then on a method, which you can't do in C#, it will return what's called a promise, and the dot then will give you, hey, when we get this variable back, do this.
Okay.
It's
So it's
very
more
confusing.
kind of like combining the next line, essentially.
It's kind of like pseudo multi-threading, but that's very advanced stuff for where you guys are at.
Yeah. It's not
So don't worry about the thens. Just know that your open curly bracket, what is in your curly brackets, is your then for C#.
Okay.
Okay. And we are way over time, but that's fine. The last section, and I'm thinking about just leaving this out, but I'd like to bring it to your attention, is testing. So far, we've just been doing UAT testing. That is your user acceptance testing. That is where you're testing it as if you are the expected user using it as expected. So a lot of times UAT is going to be done by someone other than the person coding.
Kinda like game
in order
testing.
to make sure what?
Kind of like game testing.
A lot like game testing. In fact, game testing is a type of UAT. So that's going to be where you hand your program off to somebody and you say, hey, this is what it's supposed to do. And they go, okay. And they just try to use it like that. They're not trying to break it. They're not trying to find all the errors that could possibly happen. They're just trying to make sure that it works as expected. The next type of testing that involves people is called quality assurance testing. That's going to be your testing where you hand it off to someone with tech knowledge, somebody who's trained in testing. And a lot of developers are trained in testing code because they know how to read it. They know how to look at code. So breaking it is just another thing. And that's where you're going to hand your code off to them, and they're going to try all the things that shouldn't work. They're going to try to see if they can make your program. They're going to be looking for, what if I do this one thing 100,000 times? Or what if I try to enter in the letter A when it's expecting a number? Or what if I don't enter anything at all and try to run the program? More often than not, you are the one handing that off to a fellow developer for QA testing, or you're doing it yourself. But there are some teams that don't do quality assurance testing at all. We had a QA team at work. We no longer do QA outside of our development team, and we only do QA on things that we aren't sure about the edge cases for. The last type of testing is automated testing. This is where you're going to build unit tests that will automatically test your code as it's running. I was thinking about having you guys write unit tests, but I think I'll leave that out of this assignment, the next two assignments, because I don't want to muddy the waters, so to speak. We can add that in at a later course, but know that a lot of coding is driven or is by or for testing. So if you want to make a program, you kind of know what it's supposed to do before you start programming. And several of the types of development include testing driven development, which would be where you write the unit tests first, and then you write code just enough to get that unit test to pass. So you want to make sure that you've written only the bare minimum of code in order to get all your unit tests to pass. The other version of that is on the back end. After you've written your code, you write all the unit tests, and that's to make sure that when somebody else makes a change, they don't break your code. And every time that I've done any unit testing, it is built by the developer who wrote the code, who has an intimate knowledge of what's supposed to be happening in that code.
When somebody else, what? We lost it after that.
I don't know.
Just have them watch the recording at that
yeah.
time. Just quote the time.
I don't know the time, but it's so that when you write your tests after you write your code, that makes sure that one, your code is working as expected, and two, when someone else makes a change, they're not breaking your code.
Okay.
The time was at 1 hour and 17 minutes.
But we're probably not going to do testing for our cart inventory assignment. Before we log off for this lecture, which has already gone a little over, I would like to just touch on the 3 homeworks for this week. And after these 3, that's the end of our CS 101 class. So our assignments, go for assignment 2.1 first. We're still extending on our car dealership. We're going to be doing inheritance, so you're going to make sure you have your car class. You should already have this. you're going to define some child classes, different types of cars, and you want to give them something specific to that type of car. And we're going to add a factory method. Oh, we lost somebody.
Elora is just watching over Dad's shoulder now.
Yeah,
Okay.
because my computer kept freezing anyways.
A factory method is something that you can put in a parent object to create a typed child object. I am expecting you guys to do a little bit of research on that. I was going to cover it in my example that I had built for you guys, but if you guys don't end up building a factory method, it's not the end of the world. I will just make this part extra credit, but this would be good practice so that you can practice casting, because that's a lot of what's going to happen. But do some research on this and you'll be able to find some good examples pretty easy.
Can you share with us some of those good example sites? Because I've been looking and I found a couple. Dylan shared with me a couple that were pretty good.
Most times when
but
I'm looking for examples, I'm going to Stack Overflow, or I'm going to W3 Schools. I'm not sure I have any other examples.
Can you put those sites
I'll put them in
onto
our notes and resources section.
Thank you.
And Dylan, if you have any other sites that would be good for looking at, you want to put them in there too. But a lot of times I just type it into Google, and the first thing that'll come up, if you type in like C# factory method, first thing that'll come up will be Stack Overflow. But you do have to kind of sift through the garbage in order to get the diamonds in the rough that Stack Overflow has.
Okay.
And there's a lot of rough on Stack Overflow. So we're going to make that extra credit. I think you guys will like having it, but not the end of the world if you don't have it. And we're going to make, oh, thank you. Ooh, Geeks for Geeks. That's a good one.
Yeah,
We're going to
that's
make the
what
testing extra credit as well. There is no presentation. Do not do this presentation. So we need to update the car inventory. Notice that we need to hold a mix of types of cars. So you're not going to be creating a car object anymore. You're going to be creating a sedan or a truck, SUV. And then you need to display those cars in your inventory just like you were before. So that shouldn't change. But you'll need to be able to call the unique things that your derived classes are going to have. So if you've got a truck, you want to know if it's a 4x4. If you've got a sedan, you might want to know if it has a sun or moon roof, that sort of thing. And for the final assignment, this is where we're going to be wrapping everything up. Oh, this is the wrong one, isn't it? Totally is.
There we go.
Week
No,
2. There we go. This is where we're going to wrap up the assignment. By the end of this, you should have a functioning car inventory system. You could hand it off to a dealership and they can use it. So we're going to enhance the car inventory to accommodate a larger number of cars. If you were using an array before, this is where you're going to change it to a list. If you're using just a list, either way, you're going to need to create a car dealership class in this assignment. Like I have in our example, I'm calling an animal shelter object. Like I did in the example from last lecture, I'm calling the coffee shop object.
Okay.
This is going to be our object that stores our collections of objects. We're going to need to do a sale price calculation, which is going to be different than just our depreciation. That's where you're going to take in other factors that are dependent on specific cars. You're also going to make sure it can be used on every car. You're going to have to play around with it to figure out how to do that. You'll already have some methods that are doing that. So it should be easy to figure out. Should. Knock on wood, cross my fingers, hope for you guys. We need to be able to handle transactions. So our car dealership class is going to have a way to buy and sell cars. They're going to have a way for a customer to buy a car, and they're going to have a way to buy a car from a customer or a dealership. We want to have an advanced inventory display. This means we want our dealership to be able to display cars by type. We also want them to be able to display by make or model or price range. So you're going to have to do some if statements. You're going to have to do some logic. This is going to be quite a few methods, probably. And then the last pieces are making sure that it's user friendly. You're going to be using while loops and for loops. You're going to take in user input. And you're going to say, hey, what do you want to do? Oh, you want to buy a car. Okay. What car are you buying? That sort of thing.
So the user is either the car dealership or a customer.
We're
to the customer
assuming
program.
that this is being used by a car dealership, not a customer. So
Numbers, right?
they're selling a car to a customer, or they are buying a car from another dealership or from a customer.
Okay.
We don't care about who the car is going to or who the car is coming from. We just need to make sure we're controlling our inventory system correctly and updating the balance in our dealership so we keep track of how much money our dealership has made.
Okay.
Have you shown them how to take in input?
I should have shown everyone except for mom and dad, but if you come in here, yeah, everyone else has been shown. If you come in here and you've got your console write lines, that's saying something to the user. So if you say console write line, pick an animal. Ooh, how about pick a number? That'll be nice. Just a number is fine. We don't need to specify anything else, thanks. And then we want to actually get that number back from the person. So we're going to say int. Oh, well, we got to start with string because they're not going to be entering a number guaranteed. Int input console.readLine. That'll read to the end of the line. So they have to push enter to submit their response. And then we want to try to parse that into an int. This is not an error-friendly way to handle this, but we're not going to start dealing with error handling until next class. So if you guys do end up trying to input an int, it is totally okay to just use int parse for now.